I believe my record as president, my leadership in the world, my vision for America's future, all merited a second term. But nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy. That includes personal ambition. So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
That was President Joe Biden in July of this year, explaining his decision to drop out of the presidential race. One of the most stunning moments of 2024, Biden's announcement underscored the changing political times. Let's bring in White House reporter for The Washington Post, Tyler Pager. His latest piece is titled Joe Biden's Lonely Battle to Sell His Vision of American Democracy. It's the final chapter in his series for The Post, titled How Biden Leads. It has looked at Biden's theory of presidential leadership, and it's a must-read. Tyler, good to see you this morning. The headline that emerged from this piece that attracted so much attention from so many was that you're reporting that in recent conversations, President Biden and some of his closest aides have privately told confidants they think he still could have won, that had he stayed in the race after that disastrous Atlanta debate in June, he could have righted the ship, rallied, and defeated Donald Trump. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, as the president has reflected in the days since the election, he has said to friends, to allies, and it's a view shared by some of his closest advisors that if he had decided to stay in the race, he could have defeated Donald Trump. Long, his theory of the case of running again was that he was the only Democrat who defeated him, and he was best positioned to do so again. As Jonathan, you know, covered the aftermath of that debate, the president and his aides and some of the family thought that the coverage of the debate was overblown and the reaction was unwarranted. They acknowledged that debate did not go well, but they kept going back to their internal testing and their polling that they said showed a path for him forward. And it was the infighting in the party that they blamed for sort of the anxiety rippling through the country and the party about his presidential candidacy. And so in the days since Trump won, Biden has said that he harbors some regrets about getting out of the race and maintaining a belief that he could have prevailed over Trump in November.
Tyler, one of the things that I think is interesting is that you talk about what he tried to achieve as president. I think he was probably the most consequential president in my lifetime in many areas, from climate change to civil rights to voting rights to you name it. And a lot of it, I think history will give him credit for, but he didn't get it in the immediate time of his serving. And I was one of the few that didn't think he should be pushed out of the race. I think he did so much that it should have been respected. I mean, Donald Trump had a disastrous debate. Kamala Harris beat him like a drum, and nobody was on the Republican side saying he should pull out. So tell me how his legacy fits into his thinking and how he passed the baton, and he couldn't have had a better candidate than Kamala Harris. I think if anyone deserved it, it was her. But at the same time, I think the regard and respect for him should be underscored.
Yeah, I think that is something that a lot of his aides and friends are taking solace in. And the president himself is extremely proud of his record. In the story that we published over the weekend, there's a scene of the president in the Oval Office the morning after the election talking about the message he wanted to send to staff, emphasizing that he feels that they have, passed legislation and created a legacy that will impact America for generations. And in conversations I had with the president's closest aides and advisors, they routinely pointed out a recent ranking of historians that ranked the president the 14th best president in American history, noting that Trump was ranked last in that. But again, it is Donald Trump who is taking the oath of office on January 20th, not Joe Biden, despite his deep desire to be the one staying in the White House. But they are very proud of the record. I think one of the things I wanted to look at in this story was sort of the two-pronged approach of Joe Biden's presidency. When he was running for president in 2019 and 2020, I was there with him in Iowa and New Hampshire, traveling the country, making his case. And one of the ways that he differentiated himself from the other Democrats seeking the nomination was to make make the case that Democrats needed to work with Republicans. They needed to pass legislation in a bipartisan fashion. They needed to show Americans that democracy could work and deliver results for them. Biden succeeded on that in a lot of respects in passing a significant amount of legislation in his first 2 years that will reshape the nation's infrastructure, revive the semiconductor industry, invest in fighting climate. But it was that second part, that would in itself convince Americans to support his vision for the country's future. And it was that tension there between substance and style that I think a lot of Democrats were frustrated by as he decided, as his term ends.
Yeah, the legislative record, remarkable, but history may regard him as simply an intermission within the Trump era, rather, as he had hoped, an end to the Trump era. White House reporter Tyler Pager. Tyler, thank you so much. The new piece available to read online now, the whole series worth checking out.